Jake had been in space for what seemed like years. The deep hum of his ship's engines was all he had known. He was a soldier, trained to survive in the toughest conditions, and his ship, the Falcon, was the safest place he could be. But nothing could have prepared him for the unexpected crash. The ship had been damaged during a skirmish in an uncharted area of space. The system failed, and before Jake could make any repairs, the ship plummeted toward an unknown planet. It was a harsh fall, and when the Falcon finally hit the ground, Jake was thrown forward, his body crashing into the control panel. He groaned, in pain as sparks flew from the wreckage. His head spun and his heart raced. After a few moments, Jake forced himself to sit up. He looked around the wrecked cockpit. The warning lights flashed red, signaling that the ship's main systems were offline. He cursed under his breath. He didn't know where he was, but he did know that it wasn't the sort of place he wanted to be stranded. The planet outside was strange. It had a blue and purple hue, and the atmosphere was thick with mist. The temperature was harsh, colder than he was used to. Jake grabbed his emergency pack from the side of the cockpit and pulled out a map of the region. His heart sank when he realized that the map didn't show anything useful. This planet wasn't even registered. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stumbled out of the cockpit. As he stepped outside, the atmosphere hit him like a slap. The air was thin, and every breath felt sharp in his lungs. The ground was rocky and uneven, covered with large, jagged stones. Jake checked his ship's systems again. There was no way to repair the Falcon without tools, and he couldn't just sit there waiting to be rescued. His training kicked in, and he made a decision. He needed to explore the planet, find supplies, and find a way to survive long enough to fix the ship. He didn't know what he'd find, but he had no choice. As he trudged through the rocky terrain, he began to hear strange noises in the distance. It was a low humming sound, almost like a chant, but with an eerie rhythm. The sounds grew louder, and Jake instinctively crouched behind a large rock. He peered out, his heart pounding in his chest. Through the mist, he could make out figures, moving. They were tall and well-built, dressed in thick leather armor. These were not the peaceful inhabitants he had hoped for. They looked like warriors. They were women, each holding a weapon, either a spear or a blade. They seemed to be in the middle of some sort of ceremony. Jake stayed hidden, watching as the women gathered in a circle. Their eyes scanned the horizon, and one of them, a tall woman with dark hair, raised her hand. The others fell silent. The woman spoke in a language Jake couldn't understand, her voice strong and commanding. Then she turned toward a group of women, and it seemed as if they were about to fight. Jake's curiosity got the better of him, and he moved closer, trying to get a better look. He didn't know why these women were gathering, but something told him that they weren't just out for a stroll. He crept behind a nearby rock, crouching down low. His eyes widened as he saw two women step into the center of the group. They stood face to face, eyeing each other with fierce intensity. The crowd around them grew quiet. It was as if everyone was waiting for something. Jake didn't know what to expect, but the next moment left him in shock. The two women lunged at each other, blades flashing in the dim light. The fight was brutal, quick strikes, parries, and movements that only experienced warriors could execute. It was a test of skill, not just strength. The women moved so fast that Jake barely had time to take in the scene. One woman managed to knock the other to the ground, her blade poised above her opponent's neck. The crowd gasped, then cheered. The woman who had won raised her weapon in victory, and the others clapped in respect. Jake's mind raced. What kind of planet was this, and why were these women fighting like this? It was unlike anything he had ever seen. He had been trained for battle, but this was something else. As he watched, he noticed that there was no malice in the women's eyes. The fight had been a challenge, yes, but not a deadly one. There was honor in it. The women weren't fighting to kill. They were fighting to prove their worth, their strength. But to what end? Jake couldn't figure it out. Before he could think any further, he heard a sound behind him. He spun around, his hand instinctively, going for his sidearm. But it was too late. He was surrounded. The women had noticed him. They were now looking straight at him, their eyes narrowing with suspicion. The woman who had led the ceremony stepped forward, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. She didn't speak, but her presence was enough to make Jake take a step back. He wasn't sure if they would attack or not, but there was something about the way they moved that told him they didn't want trouble. Still, he had no way of knowing if he was about to fight for his life or face something worse. The tall woman studied him carefully, her eyes glinting with curiosity. Jake knew this was just the beginning. Jake's heart raced as the women gathered around him. The tall warrior with dark hair who had led the ceremony stepped forward. Her presence was commanding, and her eyes locked onto his with an intense gaze. She had seen him watching the fight, and now she wanted to know why he was there. The air was thick with tension. Jake stood still, his mind racing. He knew that the situation was dangerous, but he had to stay calm. He had faced threats in his life before, but nothing quite like this. These women were strong, skilled, and they didn't seem like the type to back down easily. The tall warrior, who Jake noticed had a scar running down the side of her face, spoke in a language he didn't understand. Her tone was firm, but there was a calmness to it, as though she wasn't afraid of him. The others watched him silently, waiting for his response. Jake had no idea what she was saying, but he had a strong feeling it wasn't a friendly greeting. He raised his hands slightly in a gesture of peace and tried speaking in English, though he knew it was unlikely they would understand. "I mean no harm," he said quietly. The warrior didn't seem to care for his words. Instead, she motioned for him to follow her. Without a word, she turned and walked toward the center of the group. The others stepped aside, parting to form a circle. Jake hesitated, but then followed her, feeling the weight of their gaze on him. The crowd was silent, watching the scene unfold. Jake's every step echoed in the stillness of the air. He didn't know what was going to happen next, but he was ready for anything. He had survived countless battles in his time, and this would be no different. The tall warrior stopped in the center of the circle and turned to face Jake. Without warning, she drew a sharp, glimmering blade from her side. The women around her cheered, their voices rising in excitement. Jake tensed, instinctively moving into a defensive stance. He didn't want to fight, but it seemed like that was the only option left. The warrior raised her blade, pointing it toward Jake. She was challenging him, daring him to fight. The crowd watched with bated breath. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a test of his strength, his honor, and his worth. Jake's mind raced. He wasn't sure what the outcome of this fight would mean, but he knew that he couldn't back down. If he did, he would lose more than just the battle. He would lose his respect, and perhaps even his chance of surviving on this planet. The warrior's eyes never left him as she twirled the blade in her hand. She was fast, precise, and completely confident in her abilities. Jake could see the strength in her movements. She was a true warrior, no doubt about it, but Jake wasn't afraid. He had faced opponents like her before. He knew how to read his enemy, how to wait for the right moment. Without warning, the warrior lunged at him. She moved like a flash of lightning, her blade cutting through the air. Jake sidestepped just in time, narrowly avoiding the strike. The crowd gasped, and Jake could feel their eyes on him, waiting to see what he would do next. He countered with a quick move, striking out with his fist. His punch landed on her shoulder, but it wasn't enough to knock her off balance. She was fast, too fast for him to catch her easily. The fight continued in a blur of motion. Jake and the warrior exchanged blows, each strike more intense than the last. Her movements were graceful, like a dancer, but there was power behind every swing of her blade. Jake had to be careful. He couldn't let his guard down for even a second. They fought in silence, the only sounds coming from the clash of metal and the grunts of exertion. The crowd watched in awe, murmuring to each other in their strange language. Jake could feel their energy, their excitement, and it only made him more determined to win. He dodged another swing of her blade and moved in closer, trying to disarm her. But she was quicker than he expected. She twisted her body, bringing the blade around in a wide arc that caught Jake off guard. The blade scraped across his arm, leaving a shallow cut. Jake winced in pain, but he didn't back off. The warrior's eyes flickered with satisfaction at the sight of blood. But Jake knew that this wasn't just about winning for her, it was about proving something. She wanted to see if he was worthy. And he wasn't about to let her down. With a burst of energy, Jake pushed forward, using his strength and speed to his advantage. He grabbed her wrist, forcing her to drop the blade. She tried to break free, but Jake held on tightly, twisting her arm until she was forced to the ground. The crowd went silent as the warrior hit the ground with a thud. Jake stood over her, breathing heavily, his heart pounding in his chest. The fight had been intense, but it was over. He had won. But the warrior didn't look defeated. Instead, she smiled up at him. It wasn't a smile of anger or frustration. It was a smile of respect. She had tested him, and he had passed. Jake slowly helped her to her feet, offering her a hand. She accepted it without hesitation, her eyes never leaving his. The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers filling the air. Jake looked around, surprised by the reaction. He hadn't expected them to accept him so easily, but it seemed that in this culture, winning a fight didn't just prove strength, it proved worth. The tall warrior nodded at him, as if acknowledging his victory. She didn't speak, but the message was clear. He had earned his place in their world. Jake's victory in the combat trial spread quickly through the planet. Word of the human who never lost echoed across the land, reaching the ears of many warriors who had once believed that no one could challenge their strength. The women of this world were fierce, proud, and skilled, and Jake's triumph had stirred something deep within them. Yet despite his growing fame, Jake felt a nagging emptiness. He didn't know why he kept winning, and he certainly didn't know why. The women continued to challenge him. Every fight left him more drained than the last, and each victory only pushed him further into the center of a culture that didn't quite make sense to him. He had come to this planet out of necessity. He had crashed here, far from home, with no other choice but to survive. But the longer he stayed, the more it felt like the planet was claiming him, shaping him into something he didn't want to be. The women looked at him with admiration, even desire. He had never been one to seek attention or glory, but it was clear that they saw him as someone different. As the days passed, more and more warriors came to him, challenging him in the arena. They fought hard, but none could defeat him. Jake was skilled in battle, and his human strength gave him an edge that no one on the planet could match. But despite his victories, Jake began to feel out of place. The planet's customs were strange, and the idea of fighting to choose a mate was foreign to him. He had always believed that love and connection were built on something deeper than physical strength. On Earth, relationships weren't about proving dominance in combat. They were about trust, mutual respect, and shared experiences. But here, it seemed that everything revolved around combat, and he couldn't escape it. The women began to look at him as if he were an object to be won, a trophy for their strength. He could see it in their eyes, the desire to conquer, to prove that they were worthy of being his partner. But that wasn't what he wanted. He wasn't interested in winning a battle to gain someone's affection. He was just a man stranded on a planet, trying to survive. One evening, after another exhausting battle, Jake sat alone by the remains of his ship. The Falcon had been barely touched by the crash, and he had managed to make some repairs, but there was no way to get it fully operational without more parts. He needed to find a way to leave, to return home, but the idea of leaving without resolving the tension on this strange planet weighed heavily on him. As he sat there, staring into the fire, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned and saw Lyra, the woman who had challenged him in the first fight. She was tall and strong, with a presence that could command attention. She had been one of the first to approach him after his victory, but unlike the others, Lyra hadn't shown any romantic interest. Instead, she had respected him as a warrior respects another. "Jake," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Why do you fight?" Jake looked at her, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What do you mean?" "You fight every day," she continued. "You defeat every challenger, but you never seem to want to win. Why?" Jake sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. He had asked himself that question many times. He didn't have a good answer. "I fight because I have to. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be here." Lyra nodded thoughtfully, stepping closer. "I've seen your eyes, Jake. You don't fight for glory or for pride. You fight to survive, to escape. But what are you running from? And why do you keep running toward the next battle?" Jake didn't know how to respond. She was right. Each fight had only pushed him further into the center of their world, but he still hadn't found what he was looking for. He had thought that by winning, by proving his strength, he would somehow earn his way out. But now, he wasn't sure that was the answer. Lyra sat beside him, her gaze distant as she looked at the stars. "This planet doesn't work the way you think it does. We fight to choose our mates because it is our way of proving that we are worthy of love, of connection. But what is worth more? The strength of a warrior or the strength of a bond?" Jake shifted uncomfortably. "I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out how to fix my ship and leave." Lyra glanced at him, a slight smile on her lips. "You could leave, but it would only be running away from the question you have to answer. You think that you're unwanted here, but what if you're wrong?" Jake looked at her, confusion written on his face. "What do you mean?" Lyra stood up and gestured around them. "You're not unwanted. The women here see you as something different. You're an outsider, yes, but you've earned respect. It's not just because of your strength, it's because you show honor in battle. You treat us like equals, not as challenges to be conquered. And that is rare." Jake felt a strange mix of emotions at her words. He wasn't sure how to process them. He had never wanted to be a hero, never wanted to be admired. All he wanted was to get back home. But now he began to wonder if maybe there was something more to this place, something deeper than just combat and survival. "You're right. About one thing," Jake said after a long pause. "I don't know what I'm running from. But maybe, just maybe, this place has something I need to learn." Lyra gave him a knowing look. "We all have something to learn. But sometimes it's not about winning every fight. It's about choosing the battles that matter." Jake nodded slowly, her words sinking in. He had never thought about it that way before. Maybe it was time to stop fighting and start understanding. The days blurred together after Jake's conversation with Lyra. He spent his time repairing the Falcon, scavenging for supplies, and fighting when the women challenged him. But no matter how many battles he won, the feeling of being trapped in this strange world never went away. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was still missing something, a piece of the puzzle that might finally make sense of why he had crashed here in the first place. One morning, as Jake worked on the ship, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. This was not just any sound. It was heavy, purposeful, and different from the usual sounds of the warriors who came to challenge him. His instincts kicked in, and he immediately stood up, scanning the area. He saw a figure emerging through the mist that surrounded the base of the rocky cliffs. She was unlike anyone Jake had seen before. She was tall, with long black hair that seemed to flow like water, and her skin had a golden hue that reflected the morning sun. Her posture was perfect, every step measured with confidence and strength. She moved like she was part of the land itself, as if she were born to walk through this harsh planet with no fear. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, locked onto Jake the moment she saw him. Jake felt a strange sensation in his chest. This woman, whoever she was different from the others. She didn't seem interested in fighting him right away. Instead, she stood still, observing him as if she were studying a puzzle she had yet to solve. The warriors around Jake had often been quick to challenge him, eager to test themselves against the outsider, as they called him. But this woman was different. She seemed to understand the gravity of the situation in a way that none of the others had. Jake watched as she approached slowly, her gaze never leaving his. There was a calmness to her, but Jake could feel the power behind her presence. It was unlike anything he had ever felt before. He felt himself standing straighter, instinctively recognizing the strength in her. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was deep, smooth, and laced with authority. "I have heard of you, human. The one who never loses." Jake raised an eyebrow. This was the first time anyone had addressed him with such directness. "I'm just trying to survive," he said, his voice steady. "I didn't ask for this." The woman didn't seem surprised by his response. In fact, she nodded, as if she had expected it. "Survival?" she repeated. "That is the nature of this world. But survival is not the same as living." Jake frowned, unsure of where she was going with this. He had fought to survive every day since he had crashed. But what did living mean on a planet like this? The woman stepped closer, her gaze searching, his face for something. "I am Kara," she said, introducing herself with a sense of quiet power. "I am the leader of these warriors. I do not challenge you for the sake of proving my strength. I am here because I need to know who you are." Jake was taken aback by her words. She wasn't here to fight him for dominance, like the others. She was here to understand him, to learn something deeper than mere physical prowess. "I'm not sure what you want from me," Jake said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I didn't come here by choice." Kara nodded, her eyes softening, just slightly. "No one chooses to come here. We are all products of our circumstances, shaped by the world we are born into. But what happens next is up to us." Jake didn't know how to respond. There was something about Kara that made him feel small, but not in a way that made him want to run. It was more like she was holding a mirror up to him, making him face parts of himself he hadn't realized he was avoiding. "You fought every warrior here, Jake," she continued, her voice even. "But none of them could match you, could they?" Jake glanced down at the ground, thinking about the many women he had faced. They were skilled, no doubt, but they had all been outmatched by his experience, his raw strength. It had never felt like a fair fight, and after a while he had started to wonder if he was just playing along with their rules, never really questioning why he had to keep fighting. "No," Jake admitted. "They couldn't. But I don't want to fight anymore." Kara's expression didn't change, but Jake could see a flicker of understanding in her eyes. She stepped closer, and Jake could feel the weight of her presence more than ever. "Then why do you keep fighting?" Kara asked, her voice low but full of meaning. "What are you really searching for?" Jake took a deep breath. The question caught him off guard. He wasn't sure why he kept fighting. Part of him had wanted to prove something. But now, as he stood there facing Kara, he realized that it wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about finding a way to belong, to find meaning in a place that had felt so alien and hostile. "I don't know," he confessed, feeling a sense of vulnerability he wasn't used to. "I thought I could fix my ship and leave. But now, I'm not so sure." Kara nodded slowly, as if she had anticipated his answer. "Sometimes we think that leaving will solve everything. But the truth is, the answers we seek are often found where we least expect them." Jake looked at her, unsure of what to make of her words. He had never been one for deep philosophy. but something about Kara's calm demeanor made him feel like she knew something he didn't. She wasn't just another warrior. She was different, and perhaps that was what intrigued him the most. "I came here because I was curious," Kara said, breaking the silence. "But now I see there's more to you than just a warrior. You have the potential to be something else, something more than what you've shown so far." Jake was quiet for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. He had never thought of himself as anything other than a soldier, a survivor, but Kara's presence made him wonder if there was more to him than just fighting. "I don't know what to do," he said finally. Kara smiled slightly, her gaze warm. "Sometimes the first step is realizing that you don't have to have all the answers." Jake's days on the planet felt different after his meeting with Kara. Every day seemed to bring more questions than answers. The strange customs of this world, the challenges, the constant battles, it all began to feel like it was closing in on him. But with Kara's arrival, something had shifted. For the first time since his crash, Jake wasn't just surviving. He was starting to question what it meant to truly live. The long hours he spent working on his ship were now filled with deeper thoughts, and he often found himself walking the rocky terrain, lost in his mind. Kara had shown him a different perspective, but he wasn't sure if he was ready to accept it. The idea that the trials on this planet weren't just about proving strength, but about understanding relationships and connections, confused him. One evening, as Jake sat outside the wreckage of the Falcon, Kara approached him once again. The evening sky was painted with streaks of pink and purple, the horizon glowing with the fading light of the day. She walked with purpose, her eyes fixed ahead as she drew near. There was something about her, something that made Jake feel like she wasn't just the leader of this planet's warriors, but someone who truly understood the complexities of life. "Jake," Kara said, her voice calm but serious. "I need to talk to you." Jake looked up from his work, setting down the tool he had been holding. He had grown used to Kara's presence, and for some reason, he felt at ease whenever she was near. "What's on your mind?" he asked. Kara sat beside him on the rocky ground, her gaze scanning the landscape. The wind blew gently, and the air was still. She took a deep breath before speaking again. "The trials you've been fighting in, they're not what you think they are." Jake raised an eyebrow, confused. "What do you mean?" "These trials," Kara continued, her voice steady, "they are a way for us to prove that we are worthy. Not just of being mates, but of understanding each other. It's not about winning or losing. It's about finding balance, connection, and respect." Jake looked at her, his mind racing. He had never thought about it that way. All he had seen was a fight for survival, a way to prove that he was stronger than the women around him. But now Kara was telling him that it wasn't about that at all. It wasn't just about defeating someone, it was about understanding why they were fighting in the first place. "But that's not how I've been seeing it," Jake admitted, his voice quiet. "I've been fighting because I thought that was the only way to survive. I never thought about the meaning behind the fights. I just wanted to win and leave." Kara nodded slowly, her eyes gentle. "I know. That's how most outsiders see it when they first arrive here. But there's more to it than just winning, Jake. The warriors here, they're not looking for someone to defeat. They're looking for someone who can stand with them, who can understand them." Jake felt a lump form in his throat. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about something deeper, something he hadn't even begun to grasp. The women here didn't just want to fight, they wanted connection. They wanted to know that their partners, their mates, could stand beside them, not just in combat, but in every aspect of life. He looked at Kara, realizing that she had been showing him something he had been blind to all along. "So all this time, I've been fighting for the wrong reasons?" Kara's gaze softened. Not the wrong reasons, just incomplete ones. You've been fighting to survive, Jake. But now, it's time to ask yourself what you really want. What do you want to find here? Jake felt a weight lift off his shoulders, but at the same time, a new burden replaced it. This wasn't just about fixing his ship anymore. It was about understanding who he was, what he was looking for in this world, and what it meant to truly live. Do you think I'm ready? He asked quietly, almost to himself. Kara didn't answer right away. She simply turned her gaze to the horizon, her eyes distant. No one is ever truly ready. But sometimes, it's not about being ready. It's about being open. Jake nodded, taking in her words. He had been so focused on surviving, on escaping, that he hadn't stopped to think about what came next. This planet had changed him in ways he hadn't expected. And it was Kara who had opened his eyes to that change. Maybe I've been running from something all along, Jake said, more to himself than to Kara. Maybe I've been running from the idea of needing someone, of not being alone. Kara's voice was soft, almost soothing. You're not alone, Jake. Not here. Jake turned to her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. He had been so caught up in his own struggles that he hadn't noticed how much Kyara had tried to help him understand their world, their customs, and himself. I don't know what to do next, Jake admitted. I thought I could fix my ship and leave, but now, I'm not sure if that's what I want anymore. Kara smiled, a small, knowing smile. The ship can be fixed, Jake, but the question is whether you'll want to leave once it's ready. Jake's eyes met hers, and for the first time since he had crashed on this planet, he wasn't sure what his next step would be. He had come to this world looking for a way out. But now, he wasn't sure if he was looking for a way out or a way forward. Kara stood up and offered him her hand. Let's find out together. You don't have to make this decision alone. Jake hesitated for a moment before taking her hand. It wasn't just a gesture of trust. It was a sign that he was ready to face whatever came next, whatever this world had to offer. The days after Kara's words had changed Jake. For the first time, he was no longer just trying to survive. He had started to understand something deeper about the planet, about the women who lived here, and about himself. No longer focused solely on fixing his ship and escaping, Jake began to think about his purpose on this strange world. He spent more time with Kara, walking together across the rocky terrain, talking about the customs of her people, and learning about the deeper meanings behind the trials. The more he learned, the more he realized that this planet's way of life was more complex than he had ever imagined. It wasn't about just proving strength or dominance. It was about showing that a person could stand by another, through both, the trials of life and the battles of the arena. Jake had thought of the fights as a way to win and leave, but now he saw them as a test of one's ability to connect, to share a bond with another. As Jake spent time with the women, he found himself being drawn to Kara more and more. Her strength, her wisdom, and her calm presence spoke to him in ways he hadn't expected. It wasn't just her skills as a warrior. It was her ability to understand the true meaning of partnership. She had shown him that there was more to life than running away from problems or challenges. Sometimes, it was about facing them head-on, with someone by your side. One evening, after the day's work on his ship, Jake found himself standing at the edge of the cliffs, looking out at the distant horizon. The sunset bathed the land in soft golden light, and the wind swept across the land. He could hear the faint sounds of the women training in the distance, their voices carrying across the wind. Kara approached quietly as she always did. He didn't need to turn around to know it was her. He had grown used to her presence, and now it was almost comforting. She stood beside him looking out at the same horizon. You've been thinking a lot, haven't you? Kara said softly, her eyes fixed on the landscape. Jake nodded, his hands resting on the rocky surface before him. Yeah, I've been thinking about a lot of things, about why I'm still here, about what I'm really looking for. Kara glanced. At him, her gaze soft. And what have you decided? Jake's chest tightened as he turned to face her. The air seemed heavier now, filled with the weight of his realization. I've been running from something all this time, he said slowly. I thought I wanted to leave. I thought that fixing my ship and going back home would solve everything. But now I'm not so sure anymore. Kara didn't speak at first. She simply watched him, her expression unreadable. Jake felt the weight of her silence but didn't shy away from it. He had come this far, and now he was ready to face whatever was to come next. You don't have to leave if you don't want to, Kara said, her voice gentle but firm. You've already proven yourself in battle. You've earned the respect of everyone here. But this world isn't just about fighting. It's about finding your place, finding a connection. If you want to stay, you can. Jake looked at her, surprised by her words. He had expected her to tell him to leave or continue with his mission, but she was offering him something different, something he had never considered before. Stay? Jake asked, his voice hesitant. But I'm not like you. I don't belong here. Kara smiled slightly, her eyes warm. You belong here because you're not like us. You're something different, and that's what makes you valuable. This world is about strength, but it's also about understanding, and you've learned that. Jake took a deep breath, the reality of her words sinking in. He had spent so long focused on getting back to what he knew, on getting away from the unknown, that he hadn't stopped to think about what he really wanted. Maybe this planet, with its customs and its challenges, had something he needed after all. Maybe he wasn't meant to go back home right away. Maybe, for once, he was meant to stay and see what this world had to offer. But I'm not ready for this, Jake said, his voice filled with doubt. I don't know if I can be what you want me to be. Kara's expression softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. No one is ever truly ready, Jake. Life doesn't give us a map to follow. We have to make our own path. Jake looked into her eyes, and for the first time, he felt like he understood. He had always been running, always searching for something. But maybe what he was looking for was right here all along. I'm not asking you to be perfect, Kara continued. I'm asking you to choose to be part of something more than just yourself. Jake nodded slowly, his heart heavy, with the decision ahead. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew that he wasn't alone anymore. He had Kara and the women of this world who had shown him what it meant to truly fight, for something more than just survival. They had shown him that strength wasn't just about power, it was about understanding, respect, and the ability to stand by someone no matter the challenge. For the first time since his crash, Jake felt a sense of peace settle within him. He wasn't sure if this was where he would stay forever, but he knew that this world had taught him something important. It had shown him that the battles weren't the end, but the beginning of something greater. Maybe staying is the right choice, Jake said quietly, his voice steady. Maybe I'm ready for something different, something real. Kara's smile grew wider. Then let's start that journey together. Jake didn't have all the answers, and he wasn't sure what the future would bring. But for the first time since his crash, he didn't feel the need to leave. He was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that he didn't have to do it alone.